Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, those in the audience, and then also folks joining us via Zoom. We really appreciate you joining us for this important topic. So my name is Heather Cleveland. I'm the chair of Sheboygan Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Initiative, and this is a collaborative with Sheboygan County League of Women Voters. We are honored to welcome both Segdrick and David to speak tonight, to speak to us tonight about their experiences and then also their call to action. So our program tonight is called Our Vote, Our Voice, and this is about incarcerated people's access to voting. And then there's also topics within that about criminal justice reform, access to voting in general, our voting process. So you'll hear topics and comments about that throughout the evening tonight. And so why are we doing this? It's to raise awareness about mental health, democracy, the health of our community, criminal justice reform, and we need people to engage to make change. So we want to share what we've learned with you tonight and serve as a call to action. In 2020, there were 13,000 people incarcerated. Approximately half of them were eligible to vote, and approximately 50 voted, 50. Note that many people in jail are not yet convicted. They are just unable to post bail, awaiting trial because they cannot afford the bail. Now is a time to action, and please help me welcome David Carlson and Segdrick Farley to help us understand the dire circumstances, hurdles people face in access while incarcerated. Please welcome David and Segdrick.
Right. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Kristen, League of Women Voters. You guys are awesome. It's been great coming down here and just having everything set up like it was. I really appreciate it. So before we jump into everything, I just want to do something quick that I just finished my 1L year of law school, and something that our professor used to do, right, quite often is like take a big breath. Right, so breathe in quickly with me and out. Nice and controlled on the breathe out. Breathe in and out. And you can shake the arms out, whatever you got to do. We got a really serious topic tonight. There's going to be, I'll give you a trigger warning. There's going to be really hard subjects discussed. One note, just on a lighter note, is I went and got my outfit like 2 hours before getting here. So like my neck is super tight, right? I almost panicked because I got a big neck, but like my shirts never fit. Usually I'm supposed to wear medium, but the neck doesn't fit on medium. So I got large. And so this shirt is super tight. I don't want to undo it though, because I don't know what it'll look like if it's just hanging. So bear with me if I'm looking like super stiff from the shoulders up. So anyways, the back to the trigger warning. You know, I don't think that Heather, Kristen, anybody that knows us invited us here because we like to make like light talk or light conversation about the things that we work on. I think that it's pretty well established that we really speak to what our truth is as far as our experiences and what is perpetuating some of the things that we've experienced in our life. I've experienced. Segdrick will explain what he's experienced, and just events that were traumatic. And so I very much appreciate sharing this space with everybody. I do not want to trigger anybody, cause any harm. And so I just want it to be relaxed. Everybody here, I am operating under the assumption that we are all allies. And so everything that we talk about tonight is strictly just dissecting maybe a different point of view on, you know, what felony disenfranchisement really does, what it perpetuates, but then also what's behind it, from the eyes of a person who has been incarcerated and from the eyes of another person who has been incarcerated. So with that, I will jump in. The first portion of my presentation, I have a script, right? So for me, I've been told plenty of times, well, we like when you just talk, when you wing it, you know what I mean? And that I will at the end, but for a certain portion of it, there were some very clear descriptions that I wanted to make. And I feel like I'm a much better writer than a speaker. And so I felt like these things needed to be articulated through writing. At the end of that, we'll go through further pictures and stuff that I have up here on the PowerPoint. Here we go. And kind of explain those things, more loosely. So the beginning, I wanted to show myself starting as a baby because I want, as we go through these descriptions of our lives, the experiences that we've had, it's important to remember that we're all humans, right? Every single person is a human being, no matter the mistake that they make. Different roads lead to things that occur and may seem inhuman, but at the same time, we all started in the same place. And so I want that to be on everybody's mind as I go through this. So my name is David Carlson. I'm the founder and co-owner of CC We Adapt. It's a peer support and mentorship agency that operates in 14 counties in the western region of Wisconsin. I'm also the co-founder and co-owner of Next Generation Properties, a real estate business that provides affordable housing in conjunction with peer services. And we focus on independent living skills and just skill development in general. Lastly, as I mentioned before, I just finished my 1L year at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law. I'm extremely happy to be done with that. That was a lot. What may be of surprise to many people is that I'm also formerly incarcerated. I was incarcerated as a juvenile and as an adult. In between those two periods of incarceration, I did 7 years with the Wisconsin Army National Guard and 2 tours in Iraq as an infantryman. Before I get into what we're here to speak about tonight, I want to pay my respects to the children and adults who have lost their lives to violence and trauma, particularly the horrible tragedy that occurred at Uvalde Elementary School in Texas. This talk tonight has everything to do with trauma and the root causes of the tragedies more and more of our society are bearing witness to. As we will speak about tonight, voting is how we collectively voice our opinions and how we create and how to create solutions to the major challenges our society faces. This political voice has always been one-sided, in the favor of white mainstream Christian citizens. The imbalance of this societal perspective has exacerbated the number of groups and demographics belonging to marginalized populations. It is apparent that this marginalization and disenfranchisement is not accidental. If you are not convinced, then consider the fact that I, Department of Corrections number 558672, while still being on extended supervision, can become a lawyer, but I cannot vote. As a formerly incarcerated individual, confusion surrounding voter eligibility boils down to 2 fundamental questions. When are our voting rights taken? When are they restored? These 2 questions rest at the heart of felony disenfranchisement and suppression in Wisconsin and throughout the United States. Felony disenfranchisement is the suspension or withdrawal of an individual's voting rights due to a felony criminal conviction. In Wisconsin, it takes place when a person is convicted of a felony and persists until they are done with their incarceration and extended supervision. An individual cannot vote while still on felony probation or on parole either. Voter suppression of the same demographic takes the form of barriers put in place to make it harder for former or currently incarcerated individuals to vote. This includes confusion as to when I am eligible to vote if I have a felony conviction. Legally, felony disenfranchisement occurred for me when I was convicted of burglary as an adult 12 years ago. I cannot begin in 2010, however. Even though it was the year I was convicted of my first adult felonies, I have to first begin with generational disenfranchisement that was passed down to me by my father. Abra Hayes, my father, was from a generation where disenfranchisement took the form of lynchings, violence, and brutality at the hands of the police and the white populace. My father described to me what the body of a lynched young Black boy looked like when he had so innocently stumbled upon him while crossing through the woods to go to town. This was when my father was only a young boy himself. He was born and raised in Mississippi in the 1950s and 60s. My father's path led him to enlist in the United States Army, wherein he would be shot in Vietnam and return home, not a hero, but rather a coon, a monkey, a nigger. Abra Hayes allegedly had the right to participate in the electoral process due to the passage of the 15th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States in 1870. What I have described above, the young Black body whose life was extinguished like that of an animal, is a consequence of the attempts this country has made in protecting Black people from the American legacy, murder, rape, and the enslavement of people who look like me. My father's generation coincides with lynch law and Jim Crow. These were the mechanisms by which Black voices were silenced. The methods used to silence the political voices of my generation have been much more covert and indirect. The 70s, 80s, and 90s brought the war on drugs, or as Tupac Shakur, the hero of my youth, once stated in his lyrics, "They got a war on drugs so the police can bother me." 1997. I was 13 years old and living with my mother in North Minneapolis. At this point in my life, I had seen the worst kind of violence human beings can do to one another. I saw these acts and was complicit in these acts. I was a product of abuse and neglect, but also love. The first assault shotgun to be stuck in my face happened 3 years prior in 1994 on the side of a road in Nebraska. I was close to turning 11 years old and the cop who put the gun in my face was grown. My hands were in the pouch of my hoodie. When he screamed at me to put my hands up, my mom interjected, "Please, David, put your hands up." I was frozen scared. She was crying. My 6-year-old brother was crying. My stepfather was in the right lane of the highway, standing unflinchingly despite the vehicles that were slamming on their brakes to keep from running him or the cops over. At 11 years old, I was placed in a group home for truancy. A staff member slammed me to the floor, my face making contact first. Then he choked me from behind, my neck and the crook of his elbow. Blood from my nose filled my mouth and covered my face, flowing into my ears. I escaped the group home that night, running across Chicago Avenue in South Minneapolis, jumping a fence into knee-high snow, and trudging through a graveyard to escape the feeling I had come to know too well, hatred. I visualized coming back to St. Joseph's Home for Children and waiting in the parking lot for this staff. I imagined emptying a magazine from a pistol into his body and erasing his existence permanently. I could go through a list of further abuses perpetrated upon me, but that would depict an inaccurate picture. Bringing you back to when I was 13, you'd find me in a dark staircase. My cousin and I both with black nylons over our faces and wearing all black. We knew the landlord of the building exited this direction after his cash poker game. My cousin pistol whipped him on the face and the head until he fell to the floor. I could feel the stickiness of his blood on my hands and my face as I went through his pockets for the money. He was screaming, "Jesus, help me," as the thud of the pistol continued making contact with the back of his head. I messed up and allowed my hand to get near his face, wherein he bit my thumb so hard I thought he would bite it off. A door opened in the hallway, so my cousin and I left the landlord on the floor lying in his blood. Fortunately, he survived. A year later, I would end up incarcerated in the Minneapolis Juvenile Detention Center and then transferred to the Hennepin County Homeschool, where I would remain for 11 months. Youth incarceration was a two-edged sword. Every now and then I was treated with kindness by staff, which I had been deprived of for a long time at that point. But then these same staff would be the ones who came into my cell, handcuffed and shackled me, and carried me in a hogtied fashion to solitary confinement when I acted out, because I was not capable of emotionally regulating in a less disruptive manner. This capricious treatment was simply an extension or a continuation of the abuse I had suffered so many times previously in my life. I accepted it as being expected because it was what I knew. I was adopted by my grandparents on my white side shortly after being released from juvenile detention. I was moved to a predominantly white community where I was one of only two black youth in the school. Between paying the restitution I owed for crimes I had committed, catching up in school and athletics, my schedule was regimented enough that I successfully completed high school with few problems. Alcoholism became my next struggle. I was arrested for operating while intoxicated in 2003, 3 days before heading to basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. I had enlisted in the Wisconsin Army National Guard in January of that year. The drinking and driving violation was not adjudicated until I returned home from basic. I graduated honor graduate of my basic training class and earned an airborne slot, which I also completed. A year later, I was in Iraq for my first tour. I performed the roles of forward operating base security, traffic control point security, dismounted operations, and presence patrols. After firefights, rocket attacks, and improvised explosive device detonations, I retreated back into the place I had created within myself when I was young. It was a place where I was numb to the world around me. I no longer took the opportunities to write my family back home to tell them I was okay, because I wasn't. On one particularly impactful presence patrol that turned into a combat engagement, we stacked on a home while our rear man kicked in the door. After we entered and achieved command and control, I was placed on watch of a family whose home it was. A mother and her children looked up at me from their seats on the floor, terror in their eyes. In that moment, I realized I had taken the place of the officer who had pointed his assault shotgun at me all those years before. From that moment, I no longer believed in my mission. My only concern was the safety of my fellow soldiers. For them, I would die, and for them, I would do harm to anyone, no matter the circumstance and no matter the mission. I never recovered from the break in my belief in what I participated in during my service in Iraq. This led me down a final eight-year tumultuous journey of drug addiction, homelessness, and incarceration. I played out all of the traumas I had experienced in my life in a 6 by 10 foot cell, waiting to die for much of my incarceration. Sorry, and I forgot to go to the pictures of that were in conjunction with the period of time. So this is the ones in the sports were after I was adopted. The ones in the white shirt were right before I ended up incarcerated as a juvenile. And here's the military, both first and second tours and also basic training. So again, I played out all the traumas I experienced in my life in a 6 by 10 foot cell, waiting to die for much of my incarceration. I became angry and acted out my rage on others, resulting in being segregated from general population. So what I'm going to show you is going to be a video of a discovery that I had. So discovery is what you get when you're being charged and possibly going to trial for a whatever the charge is. In this case, it was felony battery by prisoner. This was a charge against me for being in a fight in the jail, a fight that I went overboard in. And a couple of things that I want you to notice is how many Black people of color are in this unit, because this is a disciplinary unit on the MAX side of the jail. This is in Eau Claire County. When you see it, Eau Claire County has a 1.2% African-American population, yet we comprise half of that jail population or of that cell block population. And at any given point in time, the jail in general will have a 12 to 20%, between 12 and 20% African-American population, a vast overrepresentation of African-Americans in the county jail. And that is just a consequence of deeper seated problems. It might not come up. That's okay. I can go without it. Yeah, that's okay. I can go without it. So we'll just skip that part. What it shows is basically one thing that I didn't put in the script is that almost all of the confrontations, almost all of the violence that occurred was always between me and another person that looked just like me. It was especially in jail and prison as an adult, it's like we're pitted against each other. And I wanted to show this video because it shows it's not about necessarily the individuals in any given case. We could take this room of individuals And if we put you in a cell block, we take away enough, we deprive you of enough of the comforts and the things that really get you along, that get you by, and we keep you in that situation long enough, you're going to behave in the way that people in jail behave. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you come from. It's just what happens. It's one of those things that when you get hungry enough, you'll do anything for food. You snap into survival instinct. And that's what I really wanted to represent with that video. And so you wanted the opportunity to see it, but that's what that was about. So now moving after all of this, the transition to kind of getting on the path that I'm on now was segregation. When I was in segregation, I realized that others who were in the cells next to mine all had severe mental health disorders. They screamed and cried day and night. They threw feces and urine. They cut themselves with any object that presented a sharp enough edge. It dawned on me that despite not believing that I was mentally and emotionally suffering, my circumstances proved that I had deep-seated issues that I must address to recover from the position that I was now in. It was actually a mentor of mine, a Vietnam veteran named Mike Orban, who sent me a message via the jail kiosk that gave me the final push that it took to make me make the decision to change. All of these experiences that I've explained and many more have shaped who I am today. They have formulated my perspective, and they are to be credited with my success in progressing past the traumas of my youth. They are what have propelled me into the work that I do now. And so now tying this back into felony disenfranchisement, just political engagement in terms of individuals coming from a background like mine. There's all kinds of different forms of suppression for individuals. Down here, you probably all knew about in Milwaukee County or in the city of Milwaukee, 150 polling sites being shut down to 5 at the onset of COVID-19. I mean, it's unbelievable. Nowhere else experienced that amount of reduction in polling sites in the state of Wisconsin. And so that's an area, that type of suppression, felony disenfranchisement, where African Americans are disproportionately represented in the Department of Corrections and in jails throughout the 72 counties in Wisconsin. It's just little piece by little piece picking away at our political voices. And one thing that I, now being a peer supporter, mentor, I work in the mental health professions. I support people who have a lot of the same issues that I have. And one of the things that I see with every single individual to a person before they enter into recovery is they find their voice. At an individual level, if you don't have your voice, if you don't feel validated in the experiences and the things that have happened to you, then there's no recovering from them. As a collective, as a society, as a community, as a group, if you don't have a political voice, there is never going to be an opportunity for you to recover from the traumas that have been passed down to you individually, but they play out on a collective level. So what I started doing to combat this, first I started with working with other combat vets and veterans coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan. I joined a group called Next Objective. We worked out, like we host workouts at CrossFit gyms. We'd invite the public would make donations, and we would directly pay for individuals that needed things done, amputees that needed adapted equipment in their home, people that needed down payments for their home. This was at a time when the VA was better than it had been in the earlier years of Iraq and Afghanistan, but it still wasn't, it was a bureaucracy. And so we wanted our brothers and sisters, when they needed something, we wanted it to get to them when they needed it. And so through that, I started also working with ex-incarcerated people organizing. There's several different pictures that come back to me throughout my time incarcerated. And one of them was when I was just coming out of SEG in like an intermediary unit before going back in the general population. There was a guy on a boat, right? Boat is this plastic thing they put on the floor. And it's for when the jail is overpopulated or the prison is overpopulated. And I was talking to him because he just looked really rough. He wasn't taking being locked up very well. And he told me that he was a Marine and he had done 2 tours, one in Afghanistan. I can't remember if the second one had been Iraq or the second one was in Afghanistan. And I started looking out for him because I understood what he was going through. You had to sleep under a staircase in an unknown area, unfamiliar area. Most likely he has severe PTSD. And so wasn't sleeping, his anxiety, most likely caused by the conditions he was under, and hungry. You're always hungry coming out of the hole. Anytime you're not able to order extra food, you're hungry. It's almost like you're starving. Used to chug water at night when I was in the hole so I could sleep for a couple hours before I had to use the bathroom. Like, it's to that extent. And so, for my military brethren and sisters, like, that impacted me at a level that not much else impacts me, seeing him on the floor in a boat like that. And so those types of things are what really motivated me coming out, to just serve others. I found a different way of service other than, carrying a gun and being in combat. I found that I could just empower others. And so throughout that process, it finally led me to opening businesses, because I realized that trying to always work through bureaucracy, trying to ask for permission to do what's needed to be done now. If I got a person that's homeless and it's negative 20 degrees, I don't have 3 days to get them housing. If I have a kid that's homeless and I don't have, whatever the circumstances may be with the weather, that's how kids get kidnapped. That's how kids get abused. That's how kids end up in homes, in apartments that they shouldn't be in. And so we just do it. I have 2 for-profit businesses because I was tired of asking questions and working through the system that takes forever. And that's what all of this finally led to. Next Generation Properties and CC We Adapt. We're able to really invent solutions. We're able to help individuals immediately, and we never stop supporting those individuals. At that point, now being in business, understanding, what really drives communities, what drives legislation. This is what brought me to the importance of me being able to vote. I can't circulate petitions for candidates. I can't vote for candidates. Who knows what other small things that I can't participate in, but just those 2 alone have been huge. When I go to a candidate's open house and they have their petition for signatures on the table, and I have to tell the individual I'm on extended supervision right now, so I can't vote. It's embarrassing, just to say the least. But then also it doesn't make sense. It's illogical how that helps protect society. And so that's where I feel the last piece is where the fight needs to happen. And after this, we can get into some more of the solutions, but one of them right now, we've gone over tons in the work that, like, Heather, League of Women Voters, all kinds of different groups around Wisconsin have done. But one piece that, as far as the confusion portion, there's a lot of people who have felonies that don't believe that they ever get their, in Wisconsin, who don't believe they ever get their right to vote back. If we could just notify a person when you lose your right to vote, that would help with jail-based voting, because we don't want to have somebody accidentally vote after they've been convicted and not realize they weren't supposed to vote. And then also be notified the minute that their right to vote is reinstated across the board. If we can get that to happen, people will start recognizing the importance of engaging electorally. I'm not going to go into everything else that I was going to talk about. CC We Adapt, one of the other owners now is Thomas Sampson. He's sitting next to me right there. We met each other in a holding cell on the way to Dodge Correctional Institution. And this is what life is like now. And so with my political voice, I would be able to instruct and engage in a more meaningful way in how to set up programs, how to set up resources to really help people, because I've done it. I know it. I know the nuances. Right now we have a legislature, and it doesn't really matter which side you fall on. We have a bunch of people who have never experienced most of what I've told you today. So how do they have a solution to this? And so that's why it is so important, if we want to help our communities, that individuals who are felony disenfranchised get the right to vote back in general. But for now, what we're working on, the most actionable item, any individual that is eligible, but that is caught up in the criminal justice system, they be informed that they can vote and they be provided access to the ballot.
Good evening, everyone. I'm not, you gotta be patient with me. I'm just returning home after 21 years in prison, so I'm not very technically sound. So if I hit the wrong button and something pop up, it's not supposed to be here, just understand that. Yeah, my name is Segdrick Farley, and I am the owner of Brighter Than Sunshine, an LLC, whose aim is to enfranchise historically marginalized populations through complete electoral access to the ballot. I'm also a mentor with CC We Adapt. And I just completed my first semester of college while I'm studying law. I never knew that they can give out so much homework. I remember like struggling with my like technology. That was one of the barriers for me because they don't teach you like basic computer skills. So I'm coming home thinking like we could just write and turn in, you know, our homework. So I remember like we need to go back to analog, you know, so there was a lot of that going on. I'm an ex-incarcerated individual, as I said, served 21 years in prison for second-degree intentional homicide while armed. I was 19 years old when this situation happened. A friend of mine that I had sold drugs with, we began to dispute over territories in which we sold drugs. That ultimately led up to him shooting me. And when I was released from the hospital from that shooting, our dispute continued, which led to a situation where I ended up shooting him and he lost his life. I was sentenced to 30 years in prison in the Wisconsin State prison system, where I sat in the county jail for months and months before my trial began. During that time, I was locked up during the election year. And during the election year, there are harsher penalties for crime. Everybody calls out, you know, for penalties and sentences, harsher sentences are imposed on people facing time. So me and the other inmates in there were worried about like, man, I'm gonna get sentenced because it's the election year. When some of us, you know, none of us never thought like, hey, I got, you know, I can vote. I can probably participate in something, this democracy. We wasn't aware that we had that right to vote. There was no information given to us about anything. There wasn't any policies in place to inform us that we had a right to vote. I wasn't aware of that anyway, because those things wasn't spoken about in my home. Why is that? Why is because of historical disenfranchisement. Give me, I'm going. See, look, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, there I am. Hit right. What? You didn't show me the button. I don't want to hit the wrong button.
Tap right there.
Right there in this corner, this funny thing. Thank you. Okay. I got to take some old school. A right is something that cannot be legally denied, such as the right to free speech, the right to religion, raising a family. Whereas a privilege is something that can be given and taken away, and is considered to be a special advantage or opportunity that is only available to a certain group of people. When a person is incarcerated, from the moment that you take your first steps into a cell block, the staff who work in these facilities make sure that you understand what your privileges are, that everything is a privilege, from the officers to the administration, and sometimes even the medical staff. I've sat in 5-minute lectures about what my privileges are and how they can be taken away. Phone calls are a privilege. Family visits are a privilege. Mail is a privilege. Recreation is a privilege. And that doctrine is drilled into your head until it becomes your beliefs. You may challenge these thoughts, but with every direct order that you are made to follow, with every standing count that you are made to stand, with every lock in and lock out, that doctrine that everything is a privilege begins to set inside your head. It becomes a belief. It becomes your religion. I was sure that I had a few rights, but given the circumstances, that none of that seemed to matter. I had learned that even when I was right, I was wrong. If a staff or someone within the administration was unjust and incorrect, and I spoke out against it with integrity, I was still proven to be wrong or incorrect. I was familiar with this doctrine before I ever entered the cell block, because it was reflected in what I grew up seeing within my community. I began to think, like, how can you defeat a God? How? I think I hit this button. I was 19 years old, going on 20 when I was in prison. And one of the first situations that I remember being traumatic, this is me in Columbia Correctional Institution with my brother on one of my first visits. About a year into my incarceration, I was awakened at the door about 2 o'clock in the morning, and the CO was like, pack your stuff up. I'm like, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, where I'm going. He's like, you going to Whiteville, Tennessee. So at the time, like, a lot of us were sent to out-of-state prisons. I wasn't able to, I'm like, man, can I call my mom? I'm 19 years old, like, I'm 20 years old. I'm like, can I call my mom? No, you gotta get on this bus. So I was strip searched, put in orange junk, and changed to another inmate and put on a bus and sent on a long ride down south. I got to Whiteville, Tennessee, and I called my mom. I said, Mom, I'm in Whiteville, Tennessee now. She said, oh my God, Whiteville? I'm like, no, don't worry, there's a lot of Black people down here. But during that drive, I began to feel like sort of like livestock. I never paid attention to anything like political, anything, until my freedom wasn't like, it became involved in my freedom. So in Wisconsin, I was sentenced to 30 years, which means that my mandatory release would be 19 years and 8 months. So you have to serve about a 19-year sentence plus 18 months. That would be my complete sentence. And whatever governor, the governor of that state is in control of the correctional, system. So people like me who were under this, were parole eligible, we would watch like gubernatorial races. We became more in tune with these things because, hey, whatever governor and what policy he passes determines on when I get out. There was a policy passed during the year Scott Walker was in office, where no matter how much time I did, no matter how many changes that I made, anybody under this would not be released, keep them in prison. I would write letters to the governor like, hey, I received my high school diploma. I've done all these things to change, and hey, could you please consider letting me out? I became more intact in that. And I began to think about when I was in the county jail, I was like, man, if only I had voted, like I could have voted for somebody in office for some type of policy to get me up out of it. I thought about that, which is why I do a lot of the work that I do now. It's very rewarding when you're able to make people who are part of this democracy part of their rights. When I was released from prison, it was a continued, like I had barriers, like I couldn't get employment. I have one of the most serious felonies. I killed someone, I took someone's life. So there's nobody jumping out of the wood like, hey, I'm gonna hire you. I remember like I have a family to take care of. So that's my mom. My mom and my brother. I remember like when that day finally came, like for me to walk up out of there. I don't know how to do this. It's not gonna work. Good, because I won't embarrass myself. But a lot of the work that I've done, I met David Carlson, and he was my mentor. He was my mentor. I was in the state where I felt like, man, I don't feel like I'm a part of this society. I almost had given up because I felt excluded from a whole society that I was so happy to come home to. So a few months before my release, I have a story. A few months before my release, my social worker called me back in the office, was like, okay, I have something for you to sign. And she handed me a paper. And I said, what is this? And she said, okay, you can read it. When I read it, it said that I would not participate in any voting, any elections whatsoever when I got out, and to participate, that would be a violation of my parole and I would be sent back to prison. I remember thinking like, wow, I wasn't aware that, that this was a law. So I had assumed that once I served out my sentence, that when I return home, that I would have all my rights. I've served my debt to society. Hey, I'll be able to participate. I was excited about that. I returned to the day room and told my friends like what had just transpired, and I cried. It broke my heart, because what that said to me was that I wasn't a part of this country, no matter what I did. That feeling is why you only have 50 people that only vote. Out of the 13,000 which are incarcerated, they still call my phone. They have those stories. These are American citizens who are being denied a right. I studied the Constitution. The authors of this Constitution, I don't believe they wrote that law to ever exclude us from a vote, to take someone's voting right. The right to vote, to have a say and direction of this country, that is essential and very important. When you exclude people from those things, they'll revert to antisocial behavior. Why participate? Why try? Nothing else. That feeling of being dejected and rejected from society is something I know all too well. But I was able to this is me at an event. I met David Soul. He's a professor with the evolutionist movement. And that's Shane, my social worker that I know. This is me when I first started with We Adapt. I was talking to people about some of the services that we provide. I was real nervous right there. You probably can tell I was sweating right there, but like I am now, this is my first speaking event. So if I'm all over the place, forgive me. This mic kind of going in and out too. So that's me, that beautiful young thing right there. That's my wife and my whole family. I had got married when I returned home. That's my first year home. And my wife was like, she was like all over the place, like trying to like plan my wedding. And I was like, look, you don't know what you're doing. She's like, well, won't you plan? And I did, y'all. I did that. That's me. I did that. So we chose all black. We chose all black because I wanted to honor everybody that year who had died at the hands of a police-involved shooting. Some of the people, George Floyd, Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor. We wore black in memory of them, me and my friends. That's my family. That's my son and my daughter, my brothers. And that handsome man right there in the middle with me, that's me. In case y'all didn't know. Thank you. So the League of Women Voters, ACLU of Wisconsin, they were the first like groups to like validate me, to sit me down and ask me my thoughts on how they can help, bring votes and spread the vote. And I was like, hey, okay, I know what I'm doing now. But they made me feel a part of this society, and I appreciate you guys for even calling me here. Thank you. I guess I'll end with that.
Short person alert, sorry.
Thank you, David and Cedric, for sharing your stories. They're so important, and I'm so glad you guys came to share with us. Thank you all for joining us, spending your Thursday evening learning about something that probably was not on your radar until now. My name is Kristen Casey Booth. I am co-chair of the Voter Access and Registration Committee for the League of Women Voters here in Sheboygan County. My co-chair is Mary Liz. She could not be here tonight, but she's fantastic. The League of Women Voters was founded 102 years ago now to help educate women, newly enfranchised women, on how to vote. And since then, we have kept our mission to help every eligible voter to vote. It's often a very confusing process. Every situation is individual, and none more so than when you're in jail trying to help people vote. So I'm going to read just like David did because I'm terrible at this. So deep breath. We were approached 2 years ago by a group of law students at Yale University to verify the jail voting policy here in Sheboygan County. And it opened our eyes to that there was a very urgent need in our community to have something in writing and a policy that worked. We then offered the league, we then offered our help to the sheriff and the jail administrators, who were very open to having us with our expertise and just the work we do, knowing how to help people get the right documentation to vote. Our first visit was this March for the April election. It was a heck of a learning experience. It was harder than we anticipated. We thought that we had our bases covered, but we learned a lot, and we will go forward with that. We were able to meet with 16 individuals. 2 had to be turned away because they were homeless. There's no way to prove residency if you're homeless and you're in jail. Current state law says that you need to have a homeless shelter provide proof of residency, and a jail is not a homeless shelter. Of the 16 we did meet with, we were able to verify existing registrations online, and for some of the others, we were able to get them registered using their jail booking sheets, which are issued by the sheriff's office, so they're valid. But where you run into the problem is getting the ballot. You need a approved voter ID, of which a jail booking sheet, which is verified, has all your information that any ID would have. It is not an acceptable voter ID. So 15 of those 16 people were unable to get their ballots. We helped one. I'm very happy to say one had his driver's license in his possessions at the detention center, and Captain Brinkman gave us a photocopy of that, and we were able to get him his absentee ballot. So we learned that we need to schedule follow-ups. We need to try to get in touch with families that can possibly provide photocopies of these IDs. So that is where we are right now. What else did we learn? We learned that our best ally on the inside was Chaplain Rick. He really helped us with the follow-up, and he also provided an opportunity for witnessing those ballots. He is a trained poll worker, and he is able to do that. And he had the list of people, and he followed up with them. We were able to actually get the ID for another voter, and he will hopefully get his ballots in August and November, along with the other gentleman that we helped. But this is where you guys come in. Everyone in this audience is now aware of the obstacles that happen in jail voting here in our community. So what are you going to do about it? What can you do? You can contact your state legislators to try to convince them to make jail IDs an acceptable voter ID. You can also petition them to allow jail booking sheets to establish proof of residence for homeless inmates. Lastly, you can talk to your county board supervisors and support our efforts in the jail. And we are volunteers. This isn't costing anybody a dime. So that's a win-win. Encourage them to make a written policy and procedure for voting. We need it on the books. You can't rely on volunteers all the time. So we need to have a procedure. When tablets and internet become available to our inmates, which I know is coming, we want to make sure that it's written policy that they have access, free access, not paid access, free access to myvote.wi.gov. And I think I gave you all enough to do. Thanks for coming, guys. If you have questions, I think David and Segdrick might want to answer, or
we're going to open it up to questions. Does anyone have a question for anyone on the stage? Oh, yes.
2020 or 2031, I believe. I had 12 years of extended supervision for my initial charge back in 2010 with burglary, and every time you get in trouble, then that extends on. So the trouble that I got into, which was drug possession and obstruction, along with the fight that I was going to show you, that got me 3 more years of probation put on top of the extended supervision. So that turned out to be 15 years.
not right now, because it's not legal. It's not an acceptable. If they had an ID previously, the family can help them get a copy from the DMV. I believe.
In Eau Claire County, the jail captain right now is pretty favorable of all this. He actually, oh sorry, the jail captain, Dave Reversall, he created a lot of the policy. We have a whole policy handbook now on jail-based voting. He was really instrumental in that. And one of the things he did was he created a policy that families could bring in the ID down in booking. They photocopy the ID, and then that's a form of identification that they can have. So I believe that has worked a couple of times.
Thank you a lot. Really was experiencing something that's a little bit overwhelming, but also very important for all of us. One of the questions I have is, how much power does the sheriff or the authorities, have make sure people can vote? How much can they actually do?
For me, in the experiences that I've had now, up until this point, they have all of the authority to really remove a lot of the barriers that exist. So Captain Reversall, for instance, he put on the kiosk. So we have a kiosk in the jail. It's not all jails have them, but in our particular jail, they do. Put on the kiosk, my vote, I think vote 411, or like sites like that, so individuals can get information on who they were going to vote for. He developed the packet. So now this packet, no matter, he's actually running for sheriff now. If he becomes sheriff, the next jail captain that comes in, they have a standard to go by. And then just other things like when there was voting events with Chippewa Valley votes, the corrections officers going around and making sure people, like, just the same way as they would if there was like a meeting with an attorney or anything else happening, going around and making sure people knew that they had the opportunity to participate if they were eligible. And so just like little practical things like that alleviate a lot of the barriers in terms of people coming into the jail. The sheriff's department and the jail captain have all the authority for like Chippewa Valley votes, for instance, right? For them to come in and help people really troubleshoot whatever may be in their way to vote. So there's quite a bit of autonomy, it seems like, in my experience in Eau Claire.
I don't know if you can hear me, but
what does the ordinance look like? Do you have a sample of another county that's done something?
I'm not sure that there are many policies written with detail. I think, John, you might know. Okay. I think that county board just has that it shall be provided, and that's pretty vague. And as we approached our sheriff and the jail administrators, our approach was, we're going to help you. We know what we're doing. We know about voting. We know the ins and outs of ID and proof of residency. So we're offering our help because we know that your staff doesn't necessarily know this. So we were hoping that through our work and finding the right way, we could establish a policy and get you guys to write it. That makes sense? Does that sound good?
I will say there are examples. So this is a collaboration throughout the state, and other counties are working on this too. Eau Claire has made, I don't know if you want to touch on Eau Claire's work and what they've done.
It's the same, the packet that I was explaining. It has, I mean, the process spelled out in it, and it's been revised every time there's been a jail-based voting event, and we've ran into new challenges. Also, there is a packet that actually, if I could get your information before you leave like an email, I can shoot you. The ACLU and All Voting is Local came up with it's a guide, it's a jail-based voting guide, but it also has the data as to how many policies exist within the state of Wisconsin, both in 2020 and then now 2021 as well. So there was an increase in policies that existed from 2020 to 2021 when the advocacy was happening with all of these statewide groups that have been working together. But I can definitely shoot that to you so you can see a pretty comprehensive breakdown of the data on that. I'm not very much right now. If my wife is on, I don't know if she's, yeah, I can see she's on. She would probably confirm that for you. So I've been a little bit of a nutcase for the last year, but yeah, so. So again, this is dependent on, I guess, the buy-in of the sheriff's department in the county that you're in. Our county now, Eau Claire County, has tons of access to My Vote. I think it's Vote 411. Is that the website? Vote 411, and there may be a couple others as well. And if there were anything else that came out, I know those things could be implemented as well through the jail captain that we currently have. If you become sheriff, then obviously that will continue, but that's a county by county thing. And so that's where it would be great if we could get legislation. You know, there's a few different pieces of legislation that could really help with this. One is the hospitalized electors. There's a statute for individuals in the hospital or are quarantined now with COVID. And, you know, a selected individual in the municipality can go bring the ballot to them, have them fill it out and bring it back to their municipal drop box. That could be done with jails. It would be challenging because there's several different municipalities in one county and there's only one county jail. But there are different things that could occur. Another thing could be jails can determine which phone calls are free, toll free. 1866 Our Vote, I believe it is just one of the type of we want to call it organizations that a person can call and escalate complaints about any barriers they're facing, but they can also get information on any challenges they're facing. If something like this were open, you'd have like a real-time view on whatever challenges were coming up in any of the 72 counties if something like this were legislated. So there's several, the ID thing also, our booking sheets, when we come in, that information, if that could be used as an ID, bam, we got a lot more people who would be able to demonstrate their vote. So there are legislative pieces that would be possible in terms of there being support of that in the legislature. I think that's the big issue, especially now. You hear a lot of the, the propaganda happening right now is let's get tough on crime again. One thing that I really wanted to explain, why I described what I described, it wasn't to like shock everybody. It was, this is where I was in my life. This Segdrick, that's where he was in his life. It wasn't like we were different than anybody else sitting in this room. It was we were in different circumstances. And so given alternative choices in different circumstances, we've excelled now. And anybody, I believe almost anybody can do that. And that's what our businesses are for. We can show that people can come out of this, and this is just one prong of that, the vote, right? Being included, being in this space with you guys right now, this promotes recovery. This promotes people re-engaging in society. That's the outcome that we want, right? We don't want recidivism. We don't want a constant people turning back to what they were comfortable with, at one point when it was survival for them. We want people like this. We want families. We want people advocating for others. And so what is the outcome we want, and how do we get there? This is one of those pieces. Sorry, I went on a tangent, but
Anyone last question? One more quick question. Have you thought about pushing for maybe a group vote? Well, I come from a country where people in who are incarcerated actually can vote. They never lose that right. It's not considered a punishment that is fair. So when we have elections, candidates go to present their case. Why does that happen here?
myself, and I'm sure Cedric also want to answer. Do you want to just answer it right now? And then I'll jump in after you, actually.
I don't know why it doesn't happen. It's just since the 15th Amendment, since the end of slavery, it's been a whole promotion of disenfranchisement. This country has a long history of that. But what you guys should be aware of is that they count your body amongst the population of prisoners for seats, for their seats. They count you. They use your body in the population for seats in elections, but you are able to participate in the vote. How contradictory is that? You count me, but you don't count me out. I just believe it's just a long history that started back, from the end of slavery. There were laws where a Black man couldn't stand on the same side of the street as a white person. Hey, that's a felony, just to take those rights back. It's just a long history of that. Those things make sense. There is no law, like the Supreme Court had ruled that it is legal to vote for people in jail to vote. But it's simply on policies in place. Like, I don't believe like a lot of people have questioned that over time. It's just begin to get questioned, and some people like, well, some sheriffs like, man, I never, nobody never asked me that. You know, there's no policy in place in a lot of these places. So just challenging them is the beginning. Maybe we can see some results.
So, and then just I guess my perspective on your question, I think that every individual should be able to vote. And there's a very specific reason for that. Now running two businesses, why did I open Next Generation Properties or co-found it, right? Was because I've been in housing programs before. And as an addict and an alcoholic, if you stick me in a place by myself and I have nobody helping to support me, you can keep me there for however many months. I relapse, I'm going to sit in that place and continue using, right? That was just as an addict and alcoholic, I knew this. So to me, like, I banged my head against the wall forever trying to work within the system to be like, people need supports, and they could have a peer supporter that checks on them every day, comprehensive peer support in the housing setting. And that's gonna help them remain accountable. It will also catch a relapse. So now more landlords will buy in because the property doesn't get destroyed over a 2-month period, right? You have someone that caught it right away. So it works for everybody. Well, this is, to me, is common sense. It's not common sense to legislatures. It's not common sense to county administrators. And so when I open Next Generation Properties, that's what we have. We have 10 hours mandatory minimum of a peer supporter who goes in and checks the first 2 hours of the day. I always believe that you set your schedule, like the pace of your day is set in the first 15 minutes of being awake, right? So we have a peer supporter that goes over, helps you structure the day, helps you accomplish the objectives that you set forth for yourself during the day. And that has led to sustainable housing, right? Just little things like that. Now, how does that go back to everybody voting? Well, every single individual who has gone through this system knows its nuances. And so if we were able to vote people into positions where, like, the fear factor is, well, they're going to vote a criminal in. Well, I mean, come on, like, that's not much faith in the society then. Like, if that's what's happening, like, if you're saying, like, we're going to vote somebody in that's just going to open all the doors of everything and get rid of accountability, well, then, like, I feel like we have a deeper problem in society. But overall, if we had more individuals that had these experiences in the legislature, we're going to have better solutions, right? Our tax money is not going to be wasted. You know how much money is being wasted right now? It's being wasted on programs that are close to working, but they're not there because people that don't have experience with those things are the ones that implement the policies, the practices, and decide who gets involved with those things. I was denied a job with the county to work with individuals with backgrounds like mine. So I started my own thing, and now they contract with me, right? And so that's what I believe would happen if everybody could vote. People in prison could vote for better policies and practices in prison that lead to less traumatization when a person is incarcerated, right? To programming, to being able to pursue a degree while you're in, right? And then ultimately, the outcomes that we want. What is the best outcome? So that's a long-winded answer.
I just want to say thank you, Senator David, Kristen, and thank everybody here for coming.